Greetings friends, and welcome to Captain Samuel's Electric Leisure Dome. So far in our visits to the Dome, we focused on the Sega Game Gear. We've looked at the excellent Choplifter 3 and the decent Sonic 2 and Chicon. The Sega Game Gear was my first console as a kid, and the only console in my childhood home for several years. One of the reasons I started this YouTube channel is because the experience of really digging into the Game Gear library as a kid gives me a different perspective from YouTubers who are trying the Game Gear for the first time as adults, or maybe just dabbled in it as a kid, spending most of their time playing a different console. I see this difference in perspective most clearly when I hear other YouTubers talk about Sonic 2 and its insane, soul-crushing, childhood-ruining difficulty. Now, Sonic 2 does err on the side of being too difficult, but as I discuss in my review of the game, with patience and practice, Sonic 2 is totally beatable and a fun challenge. Part of why I feel this way is because, again, the only console I had as a kid was the Game Gear and only a few games for it. So when I received a new game, that was what I had to play for a long time. Good or not good, the games I had were the games I played. Furthermore, there were plenty of poorly made games on the Game Gear, and to really capture the full experience of the system and its library, we need to discuss those games too, because they provide a contrast to the games I consider good. Play an actual stinker, and you'll realize that Sonic 2 on Game Gear is a good time after all. So with that as our context, it's time to discuss Robocop 3 on the Sega Game Gear. Forget Ninja Gaiden, forget Dark Souls, and please, stop calling Sonic 2 impossibly difficult, because now we're going to look at the real deal for crushingly difficult, nearly impossible games. The manual opens with the story to the game, which is of course based on the movie of the same name. I never saw Robocop 3 as a kid, and I still haven't watched it. I'm just not into watching movies. I don't really enjoy them for whatever reason. However, I will make an exception for the occasional masterpiece. The story in the manual describes a dystopian urban war between criminals and corporate-funded mercenaries. Robocop tries to clean up the streets and end the conflict by shooting people. The manual goes on to describe the controls and heads-up display. There's nothing wrong with the control scheme, but Robocop moves slowly and stiffly. On the description of the heads-up display, you'll notice that Robocop has limited ammunition for each weapon, and he is also timed. When we talk about the gameplay, you'll see that limited ammo exacerbates the primary issue with the game. There's a variety of weapons for Robocop to use, with each weapon having its own supply of ammunition. The first level of the game only has the basic handgun, triple-shot handgun, and laser gun. The flamethrower and a rocket launcher, not listed in the manual, are found after level 1. Since you almost certainly won't be making it past level 1, at least without cheating or using save states, you can just forget those other weapons exist. Then the manual describes all the levels in the game. Most of them are 2D side-scrolling action platformer levels. However, some levels are vertically scrolling shooter sections where Robocop flies with a jetpack. However, none of these other levels matter because again, if you're playing the game honestly as a kid in the early 90s, you probably won't be seeing anything past level 1. So here we go folks, we're done looking at the manual, on to the gameplay. The first problem is how slowly and stiffly Robocop moves. He can walk left to right, jump left to right, and take a knee. He's a tall sprite and an easy target. Additionally, enemy bullets travel fast and are practically hit-scan projectiles. Combine all these factors and you realize this isn't a run-and-gun experience where you're dodging enemy fire and skillfully maneuvering around enemies. Nope, you're lumbering from left to right, getting peppered with unavoidable damage. There is also no reaction time available to respond to enemies. If an enemy is on screen, it's already shot you. Enemies also constantly pop out from behind you and shoot you in the back from off-screen. The way to solve the lack of reaction time to enemies would be to fire constantly as you walk so that enemies are killed the split second they appear on screen. But alas, as you will remember from our reading of the manual, weapons have limited ammunition. So what you need to do is memorize where each bad guy is going to appear and already be firing before the enemy appears, then stop firing to save ammunition once the enemy is dispatched, and repeat this process over and over. Even if you do this, however, the hit detection causes additional problems. If you're too close to an enemy, your gun touches the enemy, but the bullets come out past the gun, leaving the enemy unharmed. It's such a goofy scene to see Robocop unloading his weapon into an enemy at point-blank range with no effect. To exacerbate this issue, the enemy is often properly positioned to hit you, costing one of Robocop's lives as you take damage without dealing any yourself. The collision detection also causes issues when navigating some of the platform sections. You can fall through the edge of platforms into whatever that stuff at the bottom of the screen is. I always thought it looked like molten garbage. So, if you're able to manage this memorization process and lumber your way through to reach the first boss, you'll find that your progress at Robocop 3 has come to an end. You will not beat this first boss without cheats or save states. If you're looking for a real video game challenge, try beating the first level of Robocop 3 on Game Gear honestly, as if you were a kid in the early 90s. A common problem with Game Gear games is the small screen size and low resolution. Some games made especially for the Game Gear, such as Choplifter 3, use small sprites to give a wide field of view around the player, and a game that uses this strategy plays great. Other games, such as Sonic 2, are ports of Master System games with a cropped field of view. Sometimes this cropping process results in certain parts being unintentionally more difficult. A classic example is how the first boss in Sonic 2 is harder on the Game Gear version because there's a restricted view around Sonic, and so the player has less time to see the boulders that are bouncing downhill. Sometimes, my friends, this same approach to porting a Master System game to Game Gear by simply cropping the edges of the screen and calling it good enough results in gameplay sections that are not only more difficult than originally intended, but almost impossible. This is the case with the first boss in Robocop 3. The first level boss is a horde of thugs with rocket launchers that pour in from both sides of the screen. They appear randomly, so memorization won't help as it did with the rest of the level. On the Master System version, you can see the thugs coming from further away and have more reaction time to quickly dispatch them with your laser gun. On the cropped Game Gear port, however, the thugs appear too close to Robocop, and there is no reaction time to deal with them. They appear and instantly take a knee to blast Robocop with rockets that chew through the life bar. Now somehow, as a kid with tons of time, a fascination with any video game no matter how bad, and the rapid adaptability of a young mind, I actually beat this level and this game. As an adult, I am stunned and perplexed about how I was ever able to do that. I remember the rest of the game, after the first level being better, with more interesting weapons and more interesting levels, such as underground palaces with robot ninjas. I remember the jetpack flying levels were another impossible grind, however, and that the final boss of 2 robot ninjas was an inscrutable puzzle. Several months ago, I played through the game again using save states, just to be a content tourist and enjoy some nostalgia. Even with save states, Robocop 3 on Game Gear was a difficult grind. I thought of reloading those old save states and including some footage of the lighter levels, but decided against it. I want to show this game as I remember it, as I experienced it as a kid. One level with a nearly impossible boss at the end, blocking the rest of the in-game content. I'll never forget Robocop 3, mainly because of the notorious place it held in my childhood game collection. I give it a rating of F.